So, you know, we are in a fundamentally new reality when it comes to technology companies because of the scale that some of them have achieved and the fact that they are so global. And that's really what we're here to talk about. And Brad and I and his team worked out a description for this session, which you may not have seen. I thought it's worth reading just what it is we're going to try to talk about for the next 20 minutes. Cloud computing is great, that's the first sentence. But the rise of large and powerful global technology platforms owned by commercial companies raises fundamental questions. What kinds of rights, rules, and responsibilities should govern this new landscape? What is the role of nation states when technology is global and data moves across international borders seamlessly? What kinds of rules will best ensure tech is a force for good? Who should set them? And who's responsible for making sure we deal with these issues? Those are the kinds of things we're here to talk about. And when I was up here earlier with Tim Hetges of Deutsche Telekom, we talked a little bit about the responsibility of companies to bring some of these issues to the fore and not just be a sort of a passive participant in the waves of social transformation that's underway. The thing about Brad Smith, which is so great, and which makes me so pleased to have him up here, is that of all the top leaders in tech, I think he has grappled with those issues more than probably anyone. He was for many years the chief counsel at Microsoft. Just in the last year or so, Satya made him president of Microsoft. So he's really, I think that was a statement of how important these issues are, that somebody who's really grappled with them is now the #2 person at Microsoft. Among other things that make Brad notable, he sued the US government when they were trying to get Microsoft to turn over data about a user of some Microsoft product whose information was being held at a data center in Ireland. Microsoft properly held that it was not the prerogative of the US government to subpoena through the company data held in a foreign jurisdiction, and he won, which was a very important precedent for what the potential reach of a national government should be in a global digital economy. That said, there are no easy answers here. But I wanted to start, Brad, by asking you, when you look at this question of responsibility, what do you think the macro responsibility of companies, particularly big global tech companies, are?
Well, I think it starts by recognizing, as so many people in this room are well aware, that our products and services are having a huge impact on the world. And I think it actually behooves us to sort of adopt a sense of humility. I'd like to say, look, nobody ever died of humility. So what does that mean? I think we have to step back and really try to think about the good and bad things that come from technological change. I think it's important for technology companies to acknowledge that there are both good and challenging things that are happening in this era. I sometimes feel that we don't acknowledge enough as a tech sector that our products create challenges for some people. I think we then need to be true to ourselves, articulate our principles, do a good job of listening and learning, but also standing up for our principles. We sued the US government actually 4 times over privacy issues. 3 of those have been successful. The 4th is in too early a stage. So we need to stand up and take action, but I also think we always have to be listening and learning as well.
So what do you think you accomplished by winning that particular case, though? I mean, and talk about the other cases if you want, but that one was quite notable.
Well, as we think about a world with the cloud, the framework that we've devised is to really try to think about how to ensure that cloud computing, or just say a cloud era, is trusted by people, is responsible, and genuinely contributes to an era of inclusive economic growth. And so for us, all 4 of these lawsuits were about trust. People are not going to use technology they don't trust. In many ways, Germany has been at the epicenter of people's concerns about privacy practices, especially privacy practices by the US government. And above all, the particular case that you're referring to, David, the case involving our data center in Ireland, enabled us to stand up for the rights of Europeans to be protected by European law and by their own governments so that their data would not be turned over to the US government pursuant to a unilateral US search warrant without them knowing, without their government knowing, without their rights being respected.
So at a minimum now, everybody has to disclose when they're seeking that kind of information and when the company has surrendered it, et cetera, right?
Well, the case that we won, which we won in an appellate decision last summer, basically says, as it's always been understood to be this way, a US search warrant stops at the water's edge. The United States government cannot take a search warrant and reach into Germany or reach into Ireland or reach into other countries. If the US wants data that belongs to Europeans and that data is in Europe, it's going to have to work with European governments under some kind of mutual agreement or treaty to get it. Now, I should add, we won. It's possible the case will go to the Supreme Court. It's possible that people will try to undo it in Congress. So like a lot of issues, they don't necessarily end completely.
Okay, but now that ruling and the way you just described it sort of takes for granted the nation state as an integral unit that has authority, right? Now, in technology, we are not always of that point of view. And particularly, I think, in the case of Facebook, Google, and Amazon, the true global reach of these companies really often seems to be fundamentally outside of the law, partly because there is no global law. So when you think about that reality, and Microsoft possibly has the good fortune of not being quite as much of a consumer company, so it's not applying to you quite the same, but where should we go with all that? Do we need global law? Do those companies need to be more conscientious about the way they function on a sort of voluntary basis, or how do they get regulated now that they are so global?
Well, first of all, I would say I actually think that as a sector we work together, and I spend a lot of time in Amazon and Google and Facebook and Apple and Microsoft. We all spend a lot of time with each other. I think writ large we're all striving for the same thing. We believe that technology works best when it's global. It's the most effective, it's the most efficient, it innovates as rapidly as possible. But we do live in a world where people have rights. And their rights are valid only because they're protected by law. And the only law that stands in the world today is national law. And so we've got this schism between global technology and national law. And ultimately, it's like a Gordian knot. You have to ask, what will cut the Gordian knot? Ultimately, there's only one thing that will do that. We need governments to come together so that law becomes more common as well. We need the law to catch up. We need countries to modernize the law. The US has some of the oldest laws in this space. And ultimately, we need a new generation of law that will match the technology, ensure that the technology is global, and ensure that people's rights are respected.
Does that mean we need, like, a global treaty that many governments, or all governments ideally, would agree to abide by, aside from North Korea, of course, because they're the one outlier, of course. But is that possible? Is that part of the answer?
Well, I think ultimately all progress on almost everything in life is incremental. And you have to decide how you're going to pursue incremental progress over time to an ultimate destination. And it really involves three things. First, you've got to modernize national laws. Here in Europe, there was a new data protection or privacy law passed last year. In the United States, we're still dealing with a law that's over 3 decades old. But that's step one.
Which law are you referring to, just so people know?
In the US, it's called the Electronic Communications and Privacy Act. It was passed in 1986. And in Europe, there's the new General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, that was approved last year. The step two is to actually then get like-minded governments to put together treaties. And there was an important step last year that the tech sector strongly supported. It's a bilateral treaty between the United Kingdom and the United States so that law enforcement can work together across borders, but in a way that it better protects and respects local rights. And then ultimately, if you get like-minded governments to come together, you have building blocks and you can broaden them. You can get a treaty between the United States and the European Union. You can aspire to do something that is more global, recognizing, as you said, that there will always be outliers. There will be countries that will not sign up.
But you do see the U.S. as fundamentally behind from a legal point of view, it sounds like.
Well, one of the real challenges in the United States right now is our laws are really behind in a number of areas that matter to technology. The Principal Privacy Act was passed in 1986. The Principal Computer Security Law was passed in 1986. The big change to immigration law was made in 1986. The big change to tax law was last made in 1986. You might ask, what was it in 1986? Well, you actually had a Republican president in Ronald Reagan and a Democratic speaker in the House in Tip O'Neill who figured out how to work together. But, oh my gosh, think about how the world has changed since 1986. And so our inability in the United States to bring people together and pass new laws is, in my view, holding all of us back.
But there is kind of an anti-Americanism towards in technology in Europe in particular, which seems to me to stem from two things. The fact that American companies overwhelmingly dominate, and number two, Snowden, and what Snowden revealed, the fact that the US government has absolutely no apparent respect for literally anything. If they can achieve it, they will do it. How big of an impediment is that to progress of the type you're asking for?
Well, I think it's good to focus on each of these questions, and I'd actually approach from the vantage point I posed at the outset. Look, what's our responsibility as a tech sector? What can we listen to and learn about? What can we do to be constructive? In the first instance, we've been able to take a lot more early steps to address the impact of the Snowden disclosures, whether it's through better technology, encryption for data in transit, data at rest, legal reform, bringing lawsuits. Google has brought cases, Twitter, a number of companies, and we've slowly but surely been reforming the law. I think we're all left with a broader question, which is how do we help accelerate entrepreneurship and innovation in Europe to help contribute to a thriving tech sector here? And we're never going to be the single factor that is most decisive, but we should do our part, and we're trying. We're investing more in digital skills education, digital literacy, getting coding into schools, not just across the United States, but across Europe. We're looking for new ways that we can then support startups. You go to the Microsoft office in Berlin, you're going to see on the top floor an accelerator. We've now had 5 cohorts of companies go through that accelerator. We try to contribute to the public policy discussions here in Europe. How do we unleash venture capital so it is more readily available to entrepreneurs in Europe? How do we help Europeans bring their products to the United States? I think there's a lot that we can do to help, and we should be doing all of those things. And I think if we fail to do those things, then I think people in Europe, frankly, are well positioned to say, why aren't we living up to our responsibility?
Okay, one more thing, and then I want to hear from anybody in the audience. You have concretely taken an action that I think shows that in some ways Microsoft is more deliberately or consciously working at the national level than some of your global tech company competitors / colleagues. And the thing you've done with Deutsche Telekom is a good example. Could you just quickly explain that in case anybody here doesn't know it?
Sure. We partnered with Deutsche Telekom. We put 2 data centers here in Germany, but we used a different technology and business model. It's Microsoft technology, Microsoft know-how that worked with DT to stand up these data centers, but there is a subsidiary of Deutsche Telekom that acts as the data trustee. What that means is they run the data center, we don't. Their employees have access to the data, our employees do not. If the US government ever serves a search warrant or any kind of subpoena on us, our answer is and can only be, I'm sorry, we don't have access to that data. You're going to have to go serve that on a subsidiary of Deutsche Telekom. It really creates an alternative model, especially, I think, for public sector customers that are most interested in ensuring that their data is managed directly by one of their national companies.
Yeah, the idea of having a Microsoft cloud data center, which Microsoft employees don't have the right to the data to, is quite an innovative idea, I think. Okay, who has a quick question or comment? Please, who are you now?
Hi, Brad.
Hi, Kara.
So I want you to talk about the meeting with Trump that I saw you were there sitting next to the children. Could you talk about, I already wrote about what happened in the meeting, but can you talk about what you think the key things from this administration is? I know you and Satya brought up immigration, but what do you think the key things are on the positive and also on the negative? Because no tech person who attended that meeting said anything publicly, in a shocking bit of non-candor.
Brad was at the meeting with Trump,
Brad was
just
at
to
the
make
meeting.
sure
So
everybody knows.
And I have done my best for 5 weeks to avoid saying anything myself.
Sorry.
But I'll offer a few thoughts. Look, I think the first thing, or one thing we can think about, is how we as an industry contribute to broader and more inclusive economic growth. I think this is an issue of importance in the United States and in Western Europe, where we have to recognize that as technology automates certain tasks, it can have an impact on certain jobs. Yeah, in the United States today, there are 7.3 million fewer jobs held by individuals who have a high school diploma or less than there was in 1989.
Wow.
Since 1989, the number of jobs held by people with a 4-year college degree has more than doubled. It's gone up 109%. But that number for people with less education has fallen by 13%. And one way to look at what happened to the United States in 2016 is simply to look at that number. And so one question I ask is, how can we do more to bring the benefits of technology to job creation and economic opportunity for people who've been missing out? There are still 34 million Americans that have no access to broadband. And almost all of those folks, not all, but almost all, are in rural America.
Were those points made to Trump at that meeting?
That is the type of conversation that we had the opportunity to discuss, at least in part. We can do more, I believe, to contribute to economic growth. And we need to think about this not only in the US, I mean, we need to think about it in Europe as well. Second, I think that there's a powerful connection between these issues and educational opportunity. And I think it's fascinating to be here in Germany. I was listening to your panel, and I felt like I was back in the United States. Germany and Switzerland really stand apart from most of the industrial world, because they're really the only two countries that have low unemployment and low youth unemployment. And all of us who are Americans who are visiting Germany should actually ask why. What can we learn? I had a chance in October to spend a day and a half in Switzerland. And they have a wonderful approach to apprenticeship opportunities that start in high school, that go on through community college. It includes IT skills. I met with UBS, where they have high school apprenticeships for IT students. But it includes 270 different fields. So it's metalworking, all kinds of things. And in the United States, for example, we have an opportunity to innovate, I believe, with philanthropy, with the private sector, with state and local and even federal government help, to really address middle-skilled jobs. And then there are the issues that also matter to all of us in the tech sector, like immigration, like high-skilled immigration. How do we ensure we have a strong, healthy talent pipeline that also invests in more opportunities for Americans? How do we ensure that we address some of the broader aspects around immigration? One thing we didn't talk about at the meeting, but that I do believe is a tech issue, I believe it's a business issue, is something like DACA, the so-called dreamers in the United States. And we employ these people at Microsoft. You go to any tech company, you go to any large business in the United States, they have employees who are dreamers. And so I know that this is a moment of anxiety for many people, but it's also a moment when I think we should ask, what is it that we stand for? We didn't change because of the election, but how can we move forward in ways that address the needs of people whose needs perhaps we have not been addressing enough? And then what can we do to continue to advance those things that have long been important to us, whether it's privacy and security or issues like immigration, especially for the very good people who are honor students, who are just doing exceptional things to contribute to our society.
Well, you see what I mean about this guy talks about this stuff in a way that most senior tech leaders do not. So it's so good you're there, Brad. And for anyone who wants to know more about some of the stuff Microsoft's been doing, he oversaw a publication of a fairly comprehensive document called Cloud for Global Good, which you can look at on Microsoft's website. And it really is something that none of the other companies have attempted to articulate. So thank you for being there, Brad, and thank you for being here.